Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight is about the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial. Today marks the 100th anniversary of the horrific Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre. A white mob murdered hundreds of Black Americans, displaced tens of thousands, and looted and destroyed 1,200 homes across 35 city blocks. On May 31st, 1921, racist white mobs attacked the city's Greenwood neighborhood, which was home to an affluent Black community. Greenwood was where the city's African American doctors and business tycoons lived in stately mansions. It was so prosperous it became known as Black Wall Street. But white Tulsans did not describe it as such. They disparagingly called Greenwood Little Africa or other racist terms. Oklahoma's government at the time was still ruled by Jim Crow laws. These legally established racism and discrimination in the state. All of this became fuel for the massacre 100 years ago today. 3 survivors of this horrific night shared their memories with a United States House Judiciary Subcommittee on May 19th. The youngest of the 3 is 100 years old. The oldest, Viola Fletcher, said that she will never forget the violence of the white mob when she left her home. President Joe Biden, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and civil rights advocates will gather in Tulsa tomorrow to commemorate the tragedy. A large number of Muslims joined the National March for Palestine demonstration at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. on Saturday. They called on the United States government to end its unconditional support for Israel. They also demanded that President Joe Biden and U.S. Congress hold Israel accountable for its war crimes against Palestinians in Gaza and other cities. Some members of the Jewish community also joined the marchers. The march was organized by American Muslims for Palestine and the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations. Similar rallies have also been held in cities across America and Europe. Muslim Network TV reported last week that a news anchor in Virginia asked a candidate an anti-Muslim question during a debate on Tuesday. Now, Delegate Sam Rasool, who is running for Virginia's Democratic Party for lieutenant governor, has received an apology. In a televised debate on Tuesday night, ABC 7 anchor Dave Lucas asked Rasool to assure Virginians that he will represent all of them, regardless of their religion or beliefs. He called into question Rasool's loyalty due to the number of Muslim advocacy groups who have donated to his campaign. Rasool is the first Muslim ever elected to the Virginia General Assembly. If nominated for lieutenant governor, he would be the first Muslim candidate to run statewide anywhere in the South. The Washington Post has endorsed Delegate Sam Rasool. In international news, the remains of 215 Indigenous children were discovered at a former residential school in British Columbia, Canada, this week. Europeans and other ancestors of colonizers of the Americas have inappropriately and inaccurately labeled Indigenous people Indians. Victims discovered in the mass grave at the Kamloops Indian Residential School were as young as 3 years old. Residential schools across Canada and the United States were run by churches from the 1870s until 1996. They were rife with physical, mental, and sexual abuse, as well as neglect and other forms of violence. The schools were started with the sole purpose of removing Indigenous children from their families to forcibly assimilate them into European settler religion and culture. School superintendents at the time said the school's mission were to get rid of the Indian problem in Canada. The Kamloops Indian Residential School was founded in 1890 and run by the Catholic Church with 500 children at its enrollment peak in the early 1950s. As a mother, I wonder what happened to these First Nation children. I wonder what happened to their mothers. Do they even know that their children have died? Here's a report by Ali Khalaf and Saliha Farouk about this tragic discovery.
European Canadians wondered how to kill the Indian in the child. Their answer was the residential school. They funded churches to convert Native people into Christianity. The remains of 215 children were discovered at the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, Canada. Some children were as young as 3.
These were children who deserved to be happy. Most of all, they deserved to be safe. As a dad, I can't imagine what it would feel like to have my kids taken away from me. And as Prime Minister, I am appalled by the shameful policy that stole Indigenous children from their communities.
Indigenous leaders are calling for the protection of sites. They warn that this is just a small portion of the thousands more who died while the schools were in operation. These schools, like the Chinese schools for 5 million Uyghur children today, were aims at forced assimilation into the dominant culture. Between the 1870s and 1990s, 150,000 were placed in residential schools nationally. Estimates of children dying in these forced schools is upwards of 6,000. These children were separated from their families. They were barred from speaking Indigenous languages or practicing their culture. Survivors say Indigenous children were no stranger to death in these schools. Infectious diseases such as tuberculosis, neglect, child abuse, and malnourishment were some of the main causes of deaths. Many of those who survived did so with chronic illnesses and disabilities. To mourn those children, Canada has lowered its flags. More than 100 people gathered at the site, standing shoulder to shoulder to grieve the children who never made it home.
We have a detailed analysis on this later on in our show tonight, so keep watching Muslim Network News. The Israeli Defense Forces may be operating undercover with units to arrest activists and engaging in extrajudicial killings. Reports say that units called Musta'rabain have carried out not just arrests of Palestinian activists, but assassinations as well. On at least one occasion, a murder was acknowledged by the Israelis as a mistake. In other reports, the Musta'rabain, under the pretext of the Israeli police Operation Law and Order campaign, has been accused of kidnapping minors and torturing them to extract false confessions. The Public Committee Against Torture in Israel has said that undercover police officers pulled people, including minors, off the streets without identifying themselves. Volunteer lawyers have documented that in certain neighborhoods, about 20% of the arrests were those of children. The Palestinian Authority's preventative security forces have also been accused of arresting dozens of activists and university students in the occupied West Bank. Activists are held for several hours and often violently interrogated. The West African nation of Mali is facing another coup. Just 9 months after President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta was overthrown, the Malian army detained President Ba Ndawa and Prime Minister Mokhtar Ould on Monday. This is the country's second coup within a year. The latest one happened after a new cabinet was announced, which excluded 2 key military leaders. The United Nations Security Council condemned the move as unacceptable. The United States and the French governments have both released statements also condemning the coup. They have also spoken of targeted measures and sanctions against political and military leaders who impede a civilian-led transition to democratic governance. Mali was scheduled to hold presidential and legislative elections in February next year. On Friday, Colonel Assimi Goïta, who had been named interim president by Mali's constitutional court, promised the polls will go ahead as planned. On Thursday, Austria's integration minister, Susanne Raab, launched a website called the National Map of Islam. The website contains the names and locations of more than 620 mosques, Islamic associations, and their officials. The Islamic religious community in Austria is the country's largest Muslim organization. It has warned that the publication of this map exposes Muslims to massive security risks and is a danger to society and democracy. The Austrian Green Party, which is a member of the current coalition government, objected to the move as well. It called it contrary to integration policy and dialogue. Leaders in Turkey and Germany have also called to have the website taken down. United Nations General Assembly President Volkan Bozkir said on Thursday India and Pakistan should not change Kashmir's status. He was speaking at a news conference in Islamabad as he concluded a 3-day visit to Pakistan. In August 2019, India revoked a special constitutional status accorded to Indian-administered Kashmir. Pakistan opposed this move, accusing India of attempting to sidestep the 1972 Simla Agreement and absorb the territory without a bilateral resolution. President Bozkir indicated the possibility of a special session of the UN to address this with the support of other member countries. Who are the Uyghurs? Over 3 million Uyghur Muslims are detained in the Chinese detention camps. Who are these people and why are they subjected to detention, torture, and death? Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk explore this.
Uyghurs are indigenous people of eastern Turkestan. To their west are now the free nations of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and others. They, however, remain under the Chinese Han domination. The Chinese call their area Xinjiang, which essentially means new colony. Uyghurs are Turkic people just like Uzbek, Kazakh, and others. Although other Turkic people have lost their original Arabic script, Uyghurs still use Arabic alphabets. There are about 12 million Uyghurs. Uyghurs are mostly Muslims. Much like Tibetans, Uyghurs have struggled for survival in the face of a government-supported influx of Chinese migrants. Several countries, including the United States, Canada, and the Netherlands, have accused China of committing genocide. As many as 16,000 mosques have been destroyed or demolished by the Chinese Communist Party. Saying salam or eating halal or refusing to drink alcohol or calling family abroad are enough for one to be sent to the camps.
Coming up next after the break is our special analysis segment. Please stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you and you could be me for just 1 hour, if we could find a way to get inside each other's minds, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. Earlier tonight, we reported a tragic story about the discovery of a mass grave containing the remains of 215 residential school children in the Canadian province of British Columbia. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Saliha Farouk. Over to you, Saliha.
Thank you kindly, Hena. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Professor Don Martin Hill, who is a professor in Indigenous Studies at McMaster University, as well as an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology and the Indigenous Studies program. Professor Don, in light of the recent events that took place in British Columbia, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Now, these are some devastating events that took place, which we're only learning of the past week or so. What could be the potential effects of Indigenous communities that the government or local leadership could help brace for and support them through?
I think right now, everybody is just in a lot of pain. I don't know that you can describe it. When you live in your homeland, your country, you don't exist anywhere else on the planet. This is our country. And yet the country that was born on top of us denies our suffering, even when they find a mass grave. It felt like we were alone in that despair. And we didn't have, anybody else that finds a mass grave of 215 children, the whole country would mourn together. And it was very telling that that didn't happen. That it was once again those that are carrying that burden, that wound, had to organize to heal. The mothers, mainly here at Six Nations, it was just mothers getting together and grieving and wanting to do something. And they organized a really beautiful run and walk with moccasins, going to the residential school not too far from my home. So it's kind of difficult to describe. It's a layer of trauma. When there's denial, it would be like September 11th. Nobody wants to admit this happened, right? Like, these tragedies happen to our people. They live in our memories and our DNA and our family stories and histories. So this just brought it all to the top. And we felt very alone in that. And that's too bad. That's today in 2021.
If we could talk a little bit about historical child welfare policies that were used by Canadian residential schools, and those policies still unfortunately exist. What changes have been made by family services in Canada or in Ontario to perhaps lessen the impact of separation of Indigenous children and youth from their families?
Well, it's still happening. There's more children apprehended today by Canadian welfare system than there was ever apprehended at the height of the residential. Like, you kind of have to go back. So if you go to the, how did we get to this place right now? Today is 2 centuries, 200 to our people, the Mohawk, it would have been 400 years of wars, diseases, and epidemics and waves. So every 12 years, there would be another really substantial epidemic. So you lose 90% of your population. So start from that place. If you can imagine the majority of your people, your leaders, your medicine, your historians, you've already lost. In comes the military and creates this policy of kill the Indian, save the child. It was the military who started. I don't like calling them schools because they were not schools. Let's get that really clear. They were not schools. If you know anything, they were not schools. They were concentration camps. They were ethnic cleansing programs, genetic engineering, social engineering, but they were not schools. And that's when they took the children is when we were just hanging on by a thread. And so that policy came out of the United States through Colonel Pratt, and Canada followed suit. And originally, our people here at Six Nations, the Haudenosaunee, wanted schooling because we wanted our own lawyers. We wanted our own educated people to fight what was happening to our lands, and that's when within maybe 10 years of supporting the idea of a day school, turned quite bad, and they realized that's not what they were doing, and so Six Nations pulled their children out. It's a long story history, but we had a little bit less of a hit. We had a hit, but nothing like some of the smaller communities all across the north and in BC. Most of the kids, for example, that were at the mush hole, as we call it, the Mohawk Institute, were actually from far north. Like they would travel, they would put them in trains like cattle and transport them thousands of miles so that they would be away from their culture and community. That policy can only be described as genocide. And if you look at the Geneva Convention of Genocide, it fits perfectly, which is to destroy and whole or part a people based on their race or nationality, etc. And also another component of genocide is the removal of children from one culture, race, to another. And Canada's done that, and that is the policy, and it still is. So you had that, and then coupled on top of that, in 1928, you had the sterilizing Indigenous women without their consent. And so this idea, if you read the British Columbia Eugenics Committee, the Alberta Eugenics, it was the same language they were using to abduct the children. It was, we're incompetent, we're horrible things. And then you get to welfare. They use that as a policy now to take away our children. Well, we don't have running water. Yeah, we don't. So then they can remove the children. And if you look at in my point of view, is if you look at, for example, what's happening in Palestine and how the military treats young children, Palestinians, and kind of dispossession, removal of children, incarceration of children. We resonate. We can feel that because we experience that, and we're still experiencing that today. There are still women being sterilized without their consent. So this is not just like residential schools. There's a trauma that's very well of pain when it comes just to the most basic fundamental human right, which is to be a mother and to have your children. And that has been denied to our people for a long time. They don't understand what it's like to have your entire world ripped apart from you. Like, who would want to live and suicide now? Do you understand? Like, what would you do? I mean, I'd probably drink myself to death if they came and stole my children. The very people that we were at war with took my children. I would not have a reason to live. So you need to really come at it from the position of a mother rather than a policy. And I think that'll help Canadians understand the suffering that has been burdened on our people.
Of course. We also know that residential schooling system was a nationwide program. So that means if this happened at the Kamloops Indian residential schools, what is the likelihood, do you think, that similar events could have taken place at other schools across the country?
So there was over 15,000 children taken during this time. And remember, our populations were nearly wiped out. Some did not survive. So you had 15,000 children. They had two different types of schools in Canada. They had what they called a residential school, but if you read John Malloy's book, if you read the Truth and Reconciliation testimonials, they're in the archives. Read Rice's report, 1924, where he said these children are dying, over 50% of them are dying, begging the Minister of Indian Affairs to stop the policies that They were enacting, kids were coming in healthy, robust, and within, a year, they were either dead or nearly dead. They were work camped, they were chained, they were beaten. In Alberta, these are all recorded in Ottawa archives. None of this is, just testimony. This is like literally, they recorded their crimes. They had a doctor come in and he didn't give any anesthesia to the children, and he took out all their tonsils. And they said the lunchroom looked like a bloodbath of babies having surgery done without any reason other than somebody wanted to see if that would stop the illness. So they were experimenting, they were starving the children, the Inuit. There's records of this. So these were not isolated, small scale incidents. These were wholesale, common, besides the sexual abuse, besides the torture. So for example, here in school, you would have a needle stuck through your tongue. You would be hung on the hot pipes in the basement, and every form of unimaginable horror that you can inflict on a child was done to these children. These were not schools. I don't know how to say that. They were not learning what Canadians were learning at that time. They were not to go to, at the time, even high school. We were barred from getting a post-secondary education. And at that time, in the early 1900s, that was high school. We weren't allowed to really have an education. The plan was that we were going to be subordinated, and we were going to be the servants to the colonizers, to the settlers, and we were going to be their farm hands, their maids. So kids as young as 5 and 6 years old had to make all the winter clothes, not only for themselves, but they would sell things and they would make money. So these were money-making industries. They had 5, 6, 7 years old out there in the freezing cold logging. And that money would often go to fine wine and fine foods for those running the residential schools. This is all meticulously documented if you just do the research.
Thank you so much for that insight, Professor. I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask you about Bill C-15, which is a federal bill that passed in the House of Commons for the purpose of harmonizing Canada's laws with the UN's Treaty on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, in other words, UNDRIP. If Canadian senators were to approve this law, what impact could this have on Indigenous experiences in Canada going forward?
I mean, yes, great. UNDRIP, yay. Did they water it down? Yes, they did. To give you an example, the reason Canada can exist as a country is because of a pope in 1300s who declared any lands they found where heathens and pagans lived, they could cleanse their own. That law, doctrine of discovery, terra nullius, means the land is empty. That's the Magna Carta of why Canada and the United States and Australia and New Zealand exist. Those things need to be addressed, like those things need to be rescinded. Those are laws of dispossession. So I think there's like some issues will move forward, which is great because any movement is great, but the fundamental root cause, when you destroy a nation, you rebuild it. That's generally the law of the globe, right? If you're going to disassemble a nation through war, and what Canadians, I don't think, understand is they haven't done the rebuilding part. So there's some really important pieces that could simply make everybody's lives much better, that I'm afraid might get watered down through the bill that they have passed. And that's the part that we needed addressed the most, which is our own self-determination and self-government and nationhood, so that just given the funds that were owed to us, the lands that they took, the resources, we would be doing really well as a nation. We don't need people to do things for us. We just need justice. I'm afraid that that bill is watered down enough so that we would still be not in a position of authority over our own lives.
Of course, and just to conclude today, in the midst of all of this pain and this trauma, what is some meaningful action that you would like to see on behalf of the Indigenous community that's in trauma and suffering today because of the recent events of last week?
I think for us, we're tired. You know, we got missing and murdered Indigenous women. We have water. We don't have clean water. We don't have, like, everything that we've managed to achieve is so hard won. It's exhausting. We're tired. And when you're that tired, you don't get to grieve. And if others just stepped up once in a while and lifted that burden so that we could just literally cry, that we need to cry, we need to heal. And we can't do that when we're telling Canada to lower your flags. Like, Canadians, if you live here on our land, it is stolen land, and you're benefiting from our suffering. So just step up and acknowledge that much and lift that burden of moving TRC action forward, moving the missing and murdered Indigenous women's recommendations forward, and not letting the people who least have the wherewithal to carry this on top of everything else. It's together, and if we do better, all of Canada does better. It's just a fact. Like, if there's fairness and justice, and I think that all Canadians, whether you're new or you've been here since, you know, the first boat arrived, you still have a vested interest in uplifting and elevating the justice issues of Indigenous people, and just flying your flag and mourning with us would really feel like we're not in a situation that our great grandparents were, of hostility and denial of our tragedies. We don't want sympathy. We don't want charity. We want respect and justice. And I think workplaces, co-workers, just doing things to support whatever they're able to do, even if it's just acknowledging today is, you know, Orange Shirt Day, and wearing orange to acknowledge, you know, the children that died in residential schools. All those things do add up, and they do make us feel better when you have support. I think that's healing. That's how reconciliation really happens, is when the other people care and it's sincere. That's whatever means you can do. Acknowledging, having us out to talk to your community, you know, if they're able to, all things add up.
Professor Dawn Martin-Hill, who is an educator as well as a professor at McMaster University, I do appreciate your time being here with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having the subject on, and me. Bye.
Thank you so much, and back to Hena Zuberi in the news studio.
Thank you, Saliha. Indeed, a terrible, terrible history. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. As a partially vaccinated America reopens and tries to return to its pre-pandemic ways, Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, IHME, believes that the country could see a surge in COVID cases later this summer and into the fall. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. While everyone is celebrating vaccination and hoping good time will come, yesterday I was on the streets around my office, and majority of the people, not majority, 90% people have no mask and hardly any social distancing. But New York Times and other places, I continuously see 500 and above people dying every day. That is the same number as it was last summer. But to discuss what are the scientists thinking about what is happening right now, today I have a guest who actually in the business of projecting where this pandemic going to take. With us is Dr. Ali Muqdad. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me.
Wa alaikum salam. Professor is with the Health Metrics Sciences at the University of Washington. Tell us, what is your projection right now?
So we are projecting right now by September 1st about 600,000 deaths in the United States. And we're projecting that cases and deaths will continue to come down all the way this summer, but we will expect a surge coming next winter simply because we don't have high levels of vaccination yet, and we have a new escape variants that are circulating in the United States.
So you're expecting another high wave?
Another wave, not as high as we have seen last winter, simply because more people are vaccinated. The challenge we have ahead right now, as cases continue to come down during this summer, that people do have less of an incentive to go and get the vaccine, and we need to vaccinate as much as we can. But still, even with a surge the coming winter, because many people have been vaccinated and we have very effective and safe vaccines, we will not have as much mortality as we saw in December and January last year.
So in projection, what variable do you use?
In our projections, we're looking right now at mask wearing, social distancing measures by every state, what they have in place in order to maintain social distancing measures. Number of tests, of course, positive number of deaths, and of course, density of the population. New York City is different than a remote area or rural area in the United States.
Do you also consider in your projection different variants? For example, if the Indian variant, I don't know whether it has arrived in the USA or not, if it becomes the dominant variant, because in India, it has created devastation. New York Times was reporting that government, of course, is giving false data, but their projection is saying there may be as many as 3 to 4 million people might have died. So is that different variant is accounted for in your projection?
Yes, we do. We take into account all variants and how they compete once they are introduced together in the same place. And right now in the United States, we have several variants of concern that we are monitoring. We had the main circulation was from B117, the UK variant. And now we have what we call escape variant P1 that came from Brazil, B1351 that was first diagnosed in South Africa, and of course the B1617, which has 3 variants in it, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, that came from India. So far, what's most circulating in the US is the B117, simply because once it is present in a community, it's kind of a bully. It takes over and keeps everybody else at bay. And we're lucky in a way because the vaccines are highly effective against it. But the B1617 or the variant that was
Professor, you know these numbers. If you don't mind, still tell us where it originated, because people remember it by the name of Brazilian, British, or Indian. The numbers which you're giving may not make many sense to many people.
No, I totally agree with you. So the one that first diagnosed in India, B1617, is a big concern for all of us because it has devastated India, as you mentioned. And also it came in India and caused an outbreak. Even about 50 or 60% of the population have been infected before. So this one is an escape variant, makes previous infection do not provide as much immunity.
So has that arrived in the USA?
Yeah, it is in the US. It's circulating in the US, but it's not taking over yet simply because it's competing with the one from the UK, and the one from the UK is the more dominant right now.
So, you mentioned that you take into consideration of mask and social distancing. And in my observation in downtown Chicago around my office, a couple of months ago, it was 95, 99% people. It was rare to see anybody without a mask. Now it is reverse. It is rare to see anybody with a mask.
True, and we're noticing that in our data. We monitor mask wearing, and we're also monitoring mobility, and we see a rise in mobility and a decline in mask wearing. And as you remember, CDC put new guidance for masking. If you are vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask even indoors. And that has, of course, led to more people ditching the mask. And that's, in my opinion, a big mistake, because we still have these new variants, as we talked about, coming from India or other places. And we need to remain a little bit more vigilant until we have a higher level of vaccination in our community. We shouldn't declare victory prematurely.
It seems that mistake has been tremendous because, for example, in Cook County, according to statistics, not more than 45% are vaccinated. But the people who have dropped masks are almost everybody.
No, I mean, that's the big problem here. People who didn't want to get the vaccine are the same people who don't want to wear a mask. And then when you give them a way to justify why they're not wearing a mask, they can tell you, I'm vaccinated, and nobody is checking. So it's a big problem for all of us right now. We need to increase the vaccination level first before we can discuss social distancing measures.
You have projected next 3 months, but I did not see a projection for the following summer, because last summer was terrible. And what I'm worried about is, last winter was terrible. What I'm worried about is when we get to winter, situation probably is going to worsen because there will be less people wearing masks. Hardly anybody will be doing social distancing. And those variant which has come from India may be more easily available.
Very true. So simply when we enter winter and we have low vaccination coverage, many people are still hesitant to take the vaccine, and we have new variants arriving, and seasonality of the virus, because in winter we move indoor and our activities are indoor with no more fresh air coming in. So the potential for a surge is very possible. What will help us, of course, is vaccination. And of course, what will determine the level of the surge next winter is what type of variant is circulating at that time.
Iowa has come up, and something which New York and, not New York, New Jersey and Maryland has followed, is that they have started this lottery for people. Whoever get vaccinated get to enter a lottery, and there'll be $5 million, $1 million per week. Do you think these type of tricks going to happen? Because it's still half of the country is not vaccinated.
It helps, and it's okay to have a gaming system. It's okay. In my opinion, whatever it takes to get people to come and get the vaccine, let's do it. And paying $1 million here and there is nothing to secure our country in terms of COVID-19 and prevent a rush to our hospitals, overwhelming our hospitals, and increase mortality in winter. It's okay to do it.
How University of Washington became the center to project on this data?
We were, before COVID-19, we do something called the global burden of disease for every country in the world, and we do projections. So we project health to 2030, 2040. And when COVID-19 started in the US, as you remember, we had the first case here in Seattle and the first deaths here in Seattle. The University of Washington, our medical school, and our hospitals asked us to do projections for our hospitals to prepare for the surge. And then every other hospital started asking us, every state, and now we're doing it for every country in the world. So we have the know-how, we have the data, we have the capacity to do it, and we have been doing this on a regular basis.
Okay, so yeah, it did start there. So, but this knowledge base which you have developed, what are the chances of these type of viral attack, which become a pandemic, are going to be more common in future as mobility and connection and people meeting with each other becomes, more people are traveling than ever in human history. Do you think more pandemics are in the offing?
Definitely, we will have more epidemics and pandemics, and we need to be ready. And we had in the United States, CDC, even the Obama administration had a preparedness for a pandemic. The Trump administration stopped these activities. We need to be prepared because, as you mentioned, we're going to new places, we're interacting with animals, we're interacting with new environment, and simply, the population of the Earth our planet is increasing. And yes, there is a potential always for having an emerging infectious disease that could turn to an epidemic in a location or a pandemic, and we need to be ready for it. COVID-19 taught us a hard lesson. We're interconnected, and we're not safe in any country unless every one of us is safe, and we need to work together.
Enlarging aperture a little bit of this conversation, recently I saw a report that had this startling, funny information that in Tokyo, diapers for older people outsell the diapers for children. And it says the population in the world, by and large, is on the side of unable to replace itself, with some small exceptions. So more pandemic and more population reduction. Does your center deal with how the human civilization will be working, say 50, 80 years from now?
Yes, we do. And actually, we published projections to 2,100 in terms of the population. And we showed, as you mentioned, that in many countries, the population will be coming down. In some countries, it's going up, Nigeria, and some countries in Africa, it will continue to go up. And yes, we have a problem where we will have more older people and less younger people to take care of them. And in many countries right now, the only way to solve this problem is to encourage immigration. I know this is a hot topic in the United States. In the US, we've been able to replace our population because we have new immigrants coming. If you remember, Germany took a lot of immigrants. But countries like Japan and others, they'll have a big problem to sustain their economic development simply because they don't have enough manpower to produce enough goods and services and funds to sustain the older population.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ali Muqdad, Professor, for your tremendous amount of work helping guide public policy. And I'm very happy to note that you are saying that we are still not out of danger. Some people are declaring victory and moving forward without any vaccine or social distancing right now.
Thank you, and Assalamu alaikum. We need to be safe, all of us.
Walaikum salam. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid and Dr. Muqdad. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Keep watching Muslim Network TV. For more, visit our website, muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.